I've never been somebody that can really handle horror that well. When it comes to movies, I'm mostly okay, but once it starts to get any more interactive than that, I'm out. So when it comes to horror games, I pretty much stay away from them altogether. That's why whenever I play something that isn't a horror game and those sorts of themes pop up, I almost find myself being more scared since I wasn't expecting it in the first place. However, I have to admit it can be a refreshing tone shift if it's done right. And given that Halloween is right around the corner, I figured I'd go over some of my favorite spooky moments in games that are otherwise not really that scary. Starting off strong, we have a level from the Sly Cooper series. Now, I've mentioned these games in passing before, but I can't stress enough how much I loved them as a kid and still do to this day. I play them all the time, but even with how obsessed I would stop playing every once in a while because of how much certain levels would creep me out. If you were never lucky enough to play them or don't know what they are, let me quickly explain. Sly Cooper is an action platformer where you play as a raccoon thief who steals from other criminals and travels the world with his two best friends to pull off overarching heists. That's kind of a simple oversimplification, but it is a pretty simple game and extremely fun. The world I want to highlight from the series today is the Vicious Voodoo level from Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, the game that started it all. This level is pretty much exactly in the middle of the game, so I had to eventually get over how creepy it was, but it definitely took a while for me. It has everything my 10-year-old self was afraid of, and everything I tried to convince myself I'm not afraid of anymore. Like all the levels in Sly Cooper, you are greeted with a cutscene explaining what the boss is like and how they grew into the person they are, and boy was it just too much for me as a kid. Ms. Ruby is just a lot more supernatural compared to all the other bosses, and I was not ready for that. After you actually get into the level, you're greeted with the hub area, which is a dark Haitian jungle filled with spiders and mosquitoes. When you actually get into the sublevels, you are forced to deal with ghosts, giant snakes, and tree monsters, all the time not knowing what will be thrown at you next, and it can be really jarring when the rest of the game has nothing like this. I think what did the most to make this scary for me as a kid, besides the level itself, is just the tonal whiplash you experience coming from the previous level. In the level before Vicious Voodoo, you are in Mesa City, Utah, going up against the bulldog boss of the game, Mugshot. Everything about this game, and this level specifically, is bright and not really scary in the slightest. Heck, the only enemy variation you see is different sorts of dogs. The contrast is so much right off the bat. Even though the world is relatively simple, I think that only ends up helping to make you more scared as a kid because your imagination starts to run wild with what could be out there in that jungle. The next game I want to mention also does a good, if not better, job of making your imagination run wild. Gone Home. Gone Home is an interesting one because although it isn't a horror game, it can definitely feel like one at times. Honestly, it felt like one all of the time for me. A story exploration game that has you explore your family's new house after returning from Europe. The game makes you feel like there are ghosts or something supernatural going on, but, spoiler alert, there isn't, and it's actually a lot more wholesome than that. Overall, the game does just enough to make you feel like something could pop out behind a door from the dark at any moment. I think that mostly has to do with the strategically underlit areas of the game and constant thunderstorm in the background of this huge house. Some people might call those aspects cheap and tired tricks, but hey, they worked for me, and at the end of the day, it got the job done to make me feel uneasy, so that's what I think matters. The initial fear does start to wear off as you become engrossed in learning the stories of the main characters' families, especially your little sister whose journals you are finding around the house, but is for whatever reason not there to greet you at the beginning of the game. I won't say much more about it because it really is a good game with a great story that is fairly short, so you should just play it for yourself. One area, however, that stands out from the rest for me, even though it all sort of feels a little creepy, is the basement portion of the game. The game is full of hidden passages, and as you explore more of the basement, you start to uncover more about the main character's father and your father's uncle. I'm not sure if the theories about this part of the game are canon or not, but the theories are there, and it makes for a very uncomfortable experience that adds to the depth of the story. I think this portion of the game is by far the most horror-like, and it almost feels claustrophobic in the dark recesses of the basement section, only making you want to get out and maybe even pause the game for a moment of peace. Now, swinging far in the opposite direction is a game that is usually far from claustrophobic in its scope. Uncharted is a game known for its great characters and sweeping Indiana Jones-style adventure. And that adventure is led by Nathan Drake as he searches for the lost treasure of El Dorado in his first game, Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. The first Uncharted game is full of snappy, fun dialogue with its main gameplay being simple puzzles and third-person gunplay. Don't let that make you think there are run-of-the-mill games though. At the time they came out, they pushed what people thought the PlayStation 3 was capable of and told a fun story while doing it, which only makes it all the more jarring and scary when you have these things thrust at you. Now, these zombie-like creatures don't really come out from nowhere. The game does tease them a little bit beforehand, but it is still a whole lot creepier compared to everything else you've been doing up to this point, and just the overall feel of the game. And while the cutscenes are a lot more horror-themed than the rest of the game, what really amps up to 11 for me is when you have to play the levels involving these zombie creatures. The usually fun and low-stakes shooting starts to feel like life or death as these bloodthirsty monsters are running at you from multiple directions. What makes it even worse is the low light and confined abandoned bunker spaces that you're mostly in during your encounters with them, making it possible for them to jump out from dark corners of the game at any moment. Overall, it's a dark, scary set of moments and an otherwise mostly fun experience that left a lasting impression on my experience with the game. Another game that may be darker overall in tone is Arkham Asylum, but is still by far not a horror game in my opinion. Most obviously because I'm able to play the game without having to shut off the console every 5 minutes. That might just be because I'm a big Batman fan, so I try to power through it. Who's to say? No, but honestly, I think it toes the line with its dark tone in a great way, so when it does briefly enter horror territory, it doesn't feel out of place at all and only makes you admire that part of the game even more. The Batman Arkham games are pretty well known and loved by gamers and comic fans alike, but just in case you've never heard of them, they are basically action-adventure games where you play as Batman and fight Batman villains while doing some minimal detective work throughout. Pretty much the ultimate Batman experience. I would recommend trying them out at the very least. In Arkham Asylum, you are tasked with going to the aforementioned asylum to investigate why the Joker let himself seemingly be caught by the Batman. As you figure out what he has planned, you encounter other members of Batman's rogue gallery along the way. One of the more horror-inspired encounters, at least in my eyes, happens fairly early on when Batman runs into Scarecrow. During this encounter, you get to a section in the asylum morgue where you're tasked with dealing with the Scarecrow and all hell ends up breaking loose for Batman psychologically. As you enter the room, you find out that you cannot leave and are taunted by the dead bodies of your parents. After that, you have to face off against Scarecrow to win your freedom from this nightmare. I feel like this section of the game works so well because it's such a cool take on showing the grief Batman suffers about the loss of his parents. I'm sure we've seen situations like this in the comics before, but I had never experienced a situation like this. I don't think we ever had to be in Batman's shoes in a game like this, so it really does a great job of making you experience it, regardless of how alarming it can feel the first time you play it and have that thrust upon you. And now that Batman's out of the way, we can move on to the big one, the spookiest moments in all of gaming. The Jumpman himself, Mario. Though being serious for a moment, Mario games are obviously not known for being scary or having even scary moments, and honestly these levels aren't the scariest either, but they still do stand out as being spookier compared to the main part of the game. I'm specifically going to talk about Ghostly Galaxy from Super Mario Galaxy. Unlike the rest of the games on this list, I don't really think this world is all that scary, but I do think it does the spooky theme so good that I had to mention it. Specifically in the level Luigi in the Haunted Mansion. It takes what has always worked about Boo levels and put it in the Galaxy format, and man does it mix perfectly. Just seeing that contrast of a haunted mansion with Luigi trapped inside against the backdrop of space is a little chill-inducing. And with the music behind, only adding to the atmosphere. I mean, when you think about it, what's scarier than the emptiness of the universe? On top of that great starting level, there are many others that do the theming just as well, like a very spooky sprint and Matter Splatter Mansion. All of them do a great job of taking the Mario atmosphere we know and love and combining it with spooky music alongside very manageable frights. But those are just some of the spookiest levels or moments in otherwise non-horror games I thought of when making this video, and there are many more that came to mind as I was working on it. The Night Before Christmas world in Kingdom Hearts, or the Boy of Silence level in Bioshock Infinite are just a couple that I thought of while making this, and I'm sure there's many more that I'd never even thought of. What about you though? Do you have any levels or moments that stick out as scary and otherwise not so scary games? Let me know down in the comments, I'd love to talk about it. And if you liked this video, please feel free to like and subscribe because I have a lot more videos like this coming. I'd love it if you stuck around. I specifically have an Assassin's Creed review coming soon that I'm pretty excited about. But that's all for me. Have a great day everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.